Hello, my abnormal family. Just wanted to tell y'all I got another story for you, and we have good news today. God is good. I would like to also say that if you'd like to help bring Hunter home, the links are in the description, and thank you everybody that is donating. It's got things on the move, and yeah, it's fixing to happen. So thank you all so very much, and you all are making a huge difference. Being a country boy from Tennessee, growing up meant camping trips and four-wheeling with my father. One particular trip, when I was probably around 9 or 10, we had gone on a 4-day trip in the Blue Ridge Mountain area on some property that one of his friends owned. I remember it was heavily forested, nearly untouched, except for a small plot where we had built a log cabin. We met at the cabin and set out on our four-wheelers to an area with a small stream that ran through a small flat area. We decided to set up our tents next and to start a fire. We had brought enough supplies to use, such as hot dogs, marshmallows, and such, for s'mores. The plan was to fish, but not for food, since I've always cared for animals. It was always catch and release just for fun. After having eaten and talked around the fire for a while, we decided to go to bed since we had a big day of four-wheeling and fishing for the next day. Yeah, sometimes we do eat the fish, but when you're camping and there's not a lot of fresh water running, just the cleaning them and everything and the mess that they make and the smell sometimes can be just a little too much. My dad and I shared a large tent with a mesh opening to let the air flow, and we could see the moonlight. After I'd fallen asleep around midnight, I was awakened by the sound of someone or something moving around in our campsite, and I could see the light get blocked from entering our tent every so often. I quietly woke my dad up and explained the situation. He grabbed his 45 and unzipped the flap, but I didn't see anything, so he told me to go back to sleep. Seeing that my dad wasn't worried put me at ease, and I eventually fell back asleep. Upon waking up in the morning, we noticed that there were what looked like bare footprints all around our campsite. At this point in my life, I had heard of Bigfoot, so of course I brought it up as an explanation to my dad, and he laughed and said, "Don't you think the footprints would be bigger, given that they were slightly bigger than my dad's, who wears a size 13, which I don't know what translates to actual foot size? We all naturally assumed that there was a barefoot human walking around while we were sleeping. Naturally, we were a little unnerved, but since we had the protection, we decided to go on with our trip. We ate breakfast and did a little fishing before we decided to go riding the trails on the four-wheelers. We got back right around dusk and built a fire to once again eat dinner. This time my dad's friend stayed up a little longer just to see if anyone would come around again. My dad and I once again retired to our tent to sleep, and this is where things start to pick up. It seems like I had no sooner closed my eyes when I was suddenly startled awake by my dad and his friend telling me to get up. We had to go. Naturally, I'm curious as to what's going on and the urgency of our departure when I hear something huge hit the water. It was still dark, and the fire had died down, so I couldn't see what it was, but I now have an idea. It was too big for a person to throw whatever landed in the water. Now I'm freaking out really bad. Both the adults have their guns drawn, and something is throwing things that sound like boulders at us. My dad and his friends start the four-wheelers, and they shout for me to get on. A 4-day trip is being cut short by something I haven't seen and is terrifying two men with police training that are used to the outdoors. As we begin speeding down the trail toward his cabin, I remember turning around to look toward all of our supplies we had left behind to see the faint outlines of two figures standing just outside the dying light of the fire by the tree line. Since it was so long ago, I wouldn't be able to give an accurate estimate of the size, but all I can say was they were massive, a lot bigger to be human, and one was much smaller than the other. We made it back to the cabin in about 20 minutes or so and sat out on the porch until the adrenaline had stopped. Finally, when everything calmed down, I asked what had happened and why my dad's friend got freaked out in the first place, and said, "I was sitting next to the fire when I heard twigs breaking, so I prepared for the confrontation. Then I heard a loud, deep guttural noise, followed by what sounded like someone snapping a huge branch or sapling in half. He then looked at my dad and said, "When I looked in the direction of the noises, I saw a reflection of what looked like two large blue eyes reflecting in the light of the fire towards me on the darkness." That's when I realized we weren't dealing with people. We sat around for a little while, contemplating whether to stay or to go back to the cabin. The question would soon be answered for us. Suddenly a loud haunting call or a howl, whatever you want to call it, from somewhere back in the woods. It was like nothing I'd ever heard, and still sends chills down my spine to this day, some 20 years later. We dashed to our vehicles and sped home in record time. The next morning, my dad and his friend, who told him that he had taken a group of people back to the site to retrieve our supplies, but when they got there, it was pretty much destroyed, and there were massive footprints all around our campsite. My dad had pretty much accepted the Bigfoot hypothesis by this point. But if that weren't enough, sometime later on, maybe a few months to a year, we were watching TV together when we happened upon a show where some people were hunting for Bigfoot, and they were doing this in Texas. And they were doing a technique called blasting, where supposedly you blast Sasquatch howls. Well, that was kind of weird, because we sat around for a little while contemplating whether to stay at the cabin to make the journey home or half asleep. The question would soon be answered for us. My dad, the next morning, called his friend, who told him that he had taken a group of people back to the same area we had been at, and they had done some call blasting before he had brought us on this trip. As soon as he played the sounds for my dad to hear, we then knew what had happened. Those sounds matched the sounds we heard on TV of this group in Texas call blasting these creatures. What had happened is my dad's friend, unknowingly, had went down and call blasted these creatures and then took us to the area to camp. That was a bad idea. My dad said, "Why did you do that and then bring us there?" He said, "Because the night they done the call blasting, nothing happened, and they thought nothing would work." I hope that people learn from this and that they do not go out call blasting, because I'm telling you, it does bring them in. You know, guys, I've never done any call blasting. I have, tried the wood knocks and the yells and stuff, and I've really never got any kind of a return like that, really. Probably what I get most is a whistle if I whistle. Sometimes throwing rocks in the water. If you can get a big splash, sometimes that will rile up some things. But really what I found is when you go out looking for these creatures and you're like moving through the woods and stuff, you can have encounters. But your encounters are not going to be real close most of the time. They're going to be a little ways from you, they're going to stay away from you, and they're going to move either. They're going to parallel you or try to work their way back behind you. Now, if you want to have what I found to be the closer encounters and longer encounters, is if you have a campfire and like a tent area. That way I think they know that you're staying in one area and they feel that they have a boundary outside of your light, and they stay out to harass you for whatever reason, curiosity, looking for an opportunity to, get some food, water, a child, whatever it may be. But, yeah, that's what's always worked best for me. I don't recommend doing any call blasting out there because we don't actually know what we're blasting out there and what it actually means to them, or what language, what we're saying in their language. We could be cussing them, we could be threatening them, daring them, we just don't know. And I think that if you're going to be out with kids and stuff in a setting like that, call blasting is for sure should not be used. But, even with adults, I think that you're still taking a huge risk because you still don't know what you're blasting out there and what you're going to, bring up. So I hope you all enjoyed this one. I enjoyed this one. And until next time, guys, keep your head on a swivel. Don't be call blasting things that will come up in the middle of the night and eat you while you sleep in your tent. And we'll see you on the next one.